The psychic series Beyond Reason was a very high-pressure situation, since we're producing 80 half-hour shows in 16 days with 10 hidden guests every day. Apart from my normal responsibilities as unit production manager in charge of all aspects of financing, I was also required to meet famous guests at the airport at all times of the day and night with a chauffeur-driven limo. My driver Costas was from Greece, so we got along really well. Sometimes he'd have to drop me at one terminal to meet a guest or guests, while he went to another terminal to meet someone else. The guests varied from politicians, actors, singers, directors, authors, comedians, you name it, they came. When Chubby Checker, known for the 60s dance craze that Twist, arrived at the airport, he was a vision in sky blue, from suit to shoes. I commented that this was the colour worn by the English soccer team I supported, Coventry City, who were called the Sky Blues. I think he got a kick out of that. I explained the premise of our show to Mr. Checker and told him that the psychic would need a personal item from him, such as a watch or jewellery, which would be collected by a production assistant. "I don't wear a watch, honey," he said. Then, opening his sky blue shirt a little further to reveal his bare chest, he declared, "See? No jewellery either." Since he didn't wear glasses, I wasn't sure what else he could produce. However, Mr. Checker had a plan. "Oh, I think I can come up with something," he said with a wicked grin. "But honey, I want you to collect it from me personally." As if I didn't have enough to do. When the time came, I knocked on his dressing room door, curious to know what his item would be. He opened the door a crack and joyfully handed me his jock strap. It was sky blue, of course. Anyway, I like to think it was an extra one he was carrying in his pocket. And yes, the psychic established that Chubby Checker was the hidden guest. She was amazing. Apart from Beyond Reason, I was also managing the Bob McLean midday talk show, and again making sure that all financial needs were met. As well as the regular local talent and musicians, there was also an eclectic mix of celebrities passing through Toronto to promote their books, movies, music, etc. There was everyone from Shirley MacLaine and Jane Fonda to Vincent Bugliosi, who was the prosecutor in the trial of Charles Manson and wrote Helter Skelter, the true story of the Manson murders. Along with the assortment of newsworthy guests appearing on the other show I worked on, Front Page Challenge, I met more famous people than I could ever have imagined. It was non-stop, round the clock, but I was loving every minute of it. It wasn't my whole life, though. I've always believed in volunteering, and it's been an important part of my life since I was a teenager. When I first arrived in Toronto, I became a volunteer at Sancta Maria House, a Catholic group home for girls aged 14 to 18 who'd been abused and rejected by their families for various reasons. A big percentage of the girls were victims of incest. I became a big sister to several of the girls over a period of 6 years and learned more about the horrors of child abuse than I ever thought possible. It was hard for these girls to trust, but because I showed up there on a regular basis, gradually I was able to earn their trust. My first little sister was Carol, who was 15 and black. She'd been sexually abused by her stepfather, and her mother was too afraid of him to stand by Carol. So Carol headed for the streets and had been a prostitute for about a year. Her pimp, Hector, was 17. I was actually a little intimidated by Carol because she was very tough. I would generally take her out to eat or to the movies. And then one night she asked if I would take her to a club in downtown Toronto. Naturally, she was underage, but looked a lot older because of her life experience, all 15 years of it. Her friends at the club were all black, and when she introduced me as her sister, they all laughed. I'm glad to say that she went on to become Miss Black Toronto and have a stable relationship with a woman. I'd become part of an organisation called Radio Women, which profiled women who were in jobs normally associated with men, such as, and don't laugh, taxi drivers, construction workers, and believe it or not, bank managers. There were no women bank managers. Well, it was the late 70s. The idea was to sell this concept to a local radio station as a regular feature, but we weren't getting very far. Because of my involvement with the girls at Sancta Maria House and the knowledge that 90% of the girls there were victims of incest, I felt a radio programme was needed to make people aware of this horrendous situation. I interviewed one of the girls whose body was covered in scars from self-harming with a metal coat hanger and a razor blade. She'd been sexually abused since the age of 3 by her grandfather and then her father. Her story was beyond belief, but she was willing to talk about it. I also interviewed social workers and psychiatrists who said that incest was much more prevalent than people realised. One psychiatrist told me that it was happening in at least 1 in 4 families, and some of them were very respectable, living in upscale neighbourhoods. Children were too afraid to report it for fear of retribution and the shame and disgrace it would bring on the family. I took a day off work in the middle of the week and was typing up notes from the interviews in my 3rd-floor apartment in that lovely Edwardian house in Rosedale, when there was a knock on the door. It was my landlady, Laura, who was German, in her 30s and beautiful. She'd recently retired from modelling, and it was well known by the residents of the house that she was seeing a therapist a few times a week. We assumed it was because she was getting older and maybe having trouble with the ageing process, even though she was still gorgeous. Laura asked me what I was doing, and when I told her, her face drained of colour and she looked as if she was going to faint. She sat down, burst into tears, and began to tell me of the sexual abuse she and her sister had suffered at the hands of her father when they were children. He died recently, and after years of being silent, she spoke to her sister about the abuse. However, her sister said she didn't know what Laura was talking about. She was in total denial. Then, when Laura told her husband about the abuse, he called her a liar. How could she say such things about her wonderful father, and especially now he was dead and couldn't defend himself? And this is why she was in therapy, because she thought she must have fabricated the whole thing. She hugged me and thanked me for allowing her to share her story, which validated her painful experiences. It was a meant-to-be moment. She wouldn't normally be at the house on a Wednesday afternoon, and neither would I. I assembled the 30-minute programme and called it Incest, the Last Taboo. Then, with the help of one of the Radio Women members who worked at a small radio station, we got it ready to pitch. As it happened, CBC Radio in Nova Scotia were doing a programme related to sexual deviance and thought this would fit in perfectly. So I sold it to them. I wish I hadn't, because the programme didn't really concentrate on the lifelong devastating effect incest has on women. Gosh, you're probably wondering, where on earth is this story going? It's a bit dark. But you see, the girls I mentored were a very important part of my life and actually deserve their own episodes. There are sad stories and triumphant stories, and I feel honoured to have been part of their lives and blessed that I still am. Back in the variety department, there was a new daily afternoon show with Howie Mandel, in several other variety shows where I was meeting many more personalities. But change was coming and America was calling. Next time, a desperate call from Los Angeles and bonding with Anthony Hopkins. Thanks for listening.